I'd like to welcome everybody to this informational meeting regarding the TPP. So just a little background on us. We represent 4,300 plumbers and steam fitters in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Basically Southwest Washington and Northern California. And the TPP not only negatively affects our membership, but all working people in this country and throughout the world. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Linda Nelson. I think she deserves a great hand. Thank you, Linda.
Well, first I'd like to explain how this meeting came to be. We invited all the representatives listed below with invitations to show up at our hall for a public forum so that people would have an opportunity to speak to them about their issues with TPP. And we were declined. And so we could have just folded our hands and said, oh well, but we decided to keep on the fight. And so I've had tremendous help from these people on stage and off stage to pull this off. This is the first time we've ever done it, and I hope it's one of many. Thank you for showing up. I'd like to ask David Delk to speak. He's the president of Alliance for Democracy. Thanks.
Great. So I'm really pleased to be here. As Linda says, I'm the president of the Alliance for Democracy. The Alliance for Democracy is a national grassroots organization which is dedicated to ending corporate domination and establishing true democracy. So that's kind of where I come from. So most of my comments with regard to the TPP and trade agreements in general come from that framework. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership is the latest attempt by multinational corporations to undermine democratic decision-making by we the people in favor of an autocratic corporatocracy. The U.S. is party to 20 of these so-called free trade agreements. The three most recent agreements with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia were negotiated by President Bush II, but they were introduced to Congress and approved by President Obama. The TPP itself covers 12 nations, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico, the original TAFTA countries, Japan, Malaysia, Chile, Brunei, Singapore, New Zealand, Peru, Australia, and Vietnam, the low-wage capital of the world. Covering 40% of the world's economic activity, it is the world's first dockable agreement, which is to say that other nations which were not party to the negotiating process will be able to join the agreement after it takes effect. So other nations that have indicated that they're interested in joining include the Philippines, Indonesia, Taiwan, South Korea, and maybe even China. So it's really imperative that we get this right. Actually, it's really imperative that we just don't do it at all. This agreement runs 30 chapters long, runs over 5,500 pages in length, and very little of it deals with traditional trade issues of tariffs and quotas. Instead, it focuses on such issues as government procurement, investment, textiles and apparel, food, financial services, telecommunications, and e-commerce. And there are only 2 token chapters that deal with either the environment or with labor. As an advocate for democracy and democratic processes, I have several major concerns about the agreement, as well as the process in which it was written and it will be approved, or hopefully not approved. From its beginning almost 7 years ago, only 600 corporate lobbyists have been part of the negotiating process. Several union and environmental organizations were included, but only as window dressings, since they really couldn't see other than just those 2 chapters. And then, even then, we find out now that at least on the labor side, they were allowed some input at the very beginning. That input was disregarded. They were never asked to come back and help actually write the final chapter. So I say, they were included as window dressing. And for most of those 7 years, even our elected U.S. representatives and senators were not permitted to see the negotiating text. After much prodding, the president finally allowed members of Congress to view the text, but with many restrictions. They had to go into a small room with no pens and paper, nothing to write with. They could take no notes. And when they left, they couldn't talk about what they had read. Therefore, we didn't know until very recently what it actually did say. So it's really important that we become informed at this point. The level of secrecy that has surrounded this agreement has been unprecedented. In November, the text was released when President Obama informed Congress of his intent to sign the agreement. Prior to releasing the text, Obama sought approval of Fast Track Authority, also known as Trade Promotion Authority, from Congress. Fast Track Authority, FTA, is used to speed the approval of these agreements through Congress. It's an undemocratic as it gets, and it sets up a special process for approval, which is completely unique in the legislative process. President Obama had been negotiating this agreement for 6 years prior to Fast Track Authority being granted. With Fast Track Authority, the president was given permission to do what he had already been doing anyway. Second, the president is allowed to sign the agreement prior to getting congressional approval. Only kind of agreements, only kind of legislation where the president gets to sign it first before Congress says yes or no. Third, the president gets to decide when he will sign it and when he will present it to Congress for their discussion and approval. Fourth, Congress is limited in the amount of time they have both to discuss and to vote. The vote must happen within 90 legislative days of the president's presentation of it to Congress. And fifth, Congress can make no changes to the agreement. They can vote only yes or no. So it really tears all of those democratic processes on their head and really gives a tremendous amount of power to the president in this whole process. So let's look at the agreement itself. Of special concern to me is Chapter 28, which includes the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Clauses, ISDS provisions. So the Investor-State Dispute Settlement Clause has been in every free trade agreement which we have signed, except for the one we signed with Australia, and starting with NAFTA, so about 20 plus years ago now. The ISDS clause allows multinational corporations to sue in private trade tribunals for, among other reasons, perceived loss of anticipated profit. The ISDS clauses in all of these agreements effectively elevate multinational corporations to be equal to the states that negotiated the agreement. And I say that, so I just want to emphasize that. Corporations are supposed to be subservient to the nations. And this agreement, as have all the others, have elevated those corporations to a state which is at least equal, if not higher, than the states that created them. When a suit is brought against a nation, a private tribunal is formed, composed of 3 judges who are pre-qualified to hear such cases. They are experts in trade law and only allowed to consider trade law in making their decisions. So no consideration is given to the effects such decisions have on labor, the environment, access to medicine, or a whole host of other public policy considerations which would normally be part of a domestic policy-making process. There is no requirement the judge be impartial or independent, and they frequently rotate between being a judge and being a lawyer for other corporate clients. Decisions of these court tribunals are final, with no appeal or recourse back to domestic courts. The decisions can include anticipated profits, loss as a result to changes in law or regulation. And while the suits are always filed against the national government, the law or regulation being challenged could be at the state or the local level. Even if the government wins, the government can still be forced to pay legal fees. Pending claims against the U.S. currently total more than $40 billion. So looking at a few examples of these suits, just to give a flavor for of what kind of laws they're challenging, Lone Pine Resources has sued Canada under NAFTA because Quebec established a moratorium on fracking under the St. Lawrence River in order to study the safety of such fracking before the fracking began. Seems reasonable. But they are claiming $250 million. Eli Lilly, an American company, sued Canada because the Canadian court system refused to grant patents on drugs manufactured by that pharmaceutical giant, saying that they had failed to provide proof that the drugs that they were applying for patents for were actually effective at doing what they're supposed to do. Eli Lilly wants $500 million. Pacific Rim, also a Canadian company, sued El Salvador because of its refusal to grant mining permits on its major rivers. With gold and silver prices going up some years ago, plans for 29 mines in the nation's rivers were developed by Pacific Rim and other companies. While such proposals were originally greeted warmly, a political battle ensued, resulting in both the political left and right, as well as the Catholic Church of El Salvador, growing in opposition to these proposals. El Salvador developed a series of requirements before allowing such developments to move forward. Pacific Rim refused to complete the requirements and instead filed suit under CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement. The amount claimed, $301 million for tiny, little, poverty-stricken El Salvador. The U.S. is also subject to such suits. Just this month, TransCanada sued the United States for $15 billion for its refusal to allow the building of the XL pipeline. In addition to that, two recent WTO decisions went against the United States. Country of origin labels called COOL for beef, pork, and poultry were challenged by Mexico and Canada on behalf of the multinational meat industries, and in a series of decisions, our labeling requirements were lowered. But even those lowered standards were not satisfactory. The WTO very recently decided to allow Mexico and Canada to impose trade sanctions of over $1 billion annually unless the COOL standards were removed. Congress recently, in the last budget vote just a week or so ago, included the elimination of those requirements, so they are gone. So you can see the undemocratic nature of the agreements, allowing multinational foreign companies to sue due to harms that they felt they suffered as a result of our democratically enacted laws and regulations. The TPP will be even worse for the United States. With prior agreements, not many foreign companies had investments in the U.S. However, the U.S.-Korea trade agreement started to change that, as many Korean companies have operations in the U.S. And now with the TPP, the number of companies which will be able to sue will increase because Japanese and Australian companies have many American investments. The estimate is that 9,200 additional foreign subsidies, foreign subsidiaries could now challenge our laws and regulations. My conclusion is that the TPP is the latest of a string of corporate agreements which directly attack the ability of our federal, state, and local governments to make decisions in our interest. Should we expect that our governments will act in our interest, making decisions which benefit us, if they constantly have to look over their shoulder to see which multinational corporation is waiting in the wings to sue us? That is not what democracy looks like. Please join me and us in opposing the TPP by calling a U.S. representative and senators and demand that they firstly tell us what their position is on the TPP and then ask that they commit to voting no. And the number for calling Congress is 202-224-3121. And that's the switchboard at Congress, so you just call and ask for your representative or your senator and make your comments to them. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to say that David Delk has been picketing at Martin Luther King and East Burnside Bridge, at least I know of, since March. And he does it at night too. We have his lighted signs behind us, and they are very effective over a clogged freeway. So we're going to show you that before we end, how effective they are. So the next speaker is Dr. Samuel Metz, Physicians for a National Health Program, and a Mattis Hill doctor. Yeah. Thank you.
Let's talk about American exceptionalism. Americans pay the least amount of taxes in the developed world, and we receive the least amount of social services of any developed nation. Those services that we don't get are schools, police, education, food for the hungry. We have the highest level of income inequality in the developed world. We have the highest rate of increase of income inequality. We have the greatest proportion of our population in poverty. We have the greatest proportion of children born into poverty who will stay in poverty because they can't get out of it. We have the highest rate of incarceration in the world, the highest rate of executing criminals. We have the highest cost of health care in the world, and we have the worst public health in the developed world. How will the Trans-Pacific Partnership alter this? The Trans-Pacific Partnership will benefit investors in large businesses. It will not benefit the people who supply large businesses. It will not benefit the people who work for large businesses. It will not benefit the people who buy the products of large businesses. And it won't benefit the people who need the products to stay alive. The Trans-Pacific Partnership treats prescription medications not as a public good, but as a commodity. That means our prescription medications will be sold at the highest price the market will bear. If you can afford your prescription medications, you get it and you live. If you can't afford your prescription medications, you don't get them and you die. And we are dying. There are about 40,000 Americans every year who die of treatable diseases because they can't afford the money for treatment. This is a unique way of dying in the civilized world. This does not happen in any place else where you can drink the water. How does the Trans-Pacific Partnership treat prescription medications as a commodity? Now, here's my perspective. I'm a physician, and I pay a lot of attention to this. First, patent rights for any medication are going to be extended. This means that large pharmaceutical companies have more time to develop more drugs that do exactly the same thing as the old drug, Before the patent expires, they take the old drug off the market and they put the next expensive drug on the market. 90% of the drugs that the FDA approves don't do anything that any current drug does. It is no safer. All it does is allow pharmaceutical companies to replace one patentable drug with another. However, there's a more alarming aspect of this, which you heard from David. Let's suppose you're a government agency and you are going to negotiate drug prices for the people that depend on you to provide those medications. This is what the VA does. It's what Medicare should do, but it can't because of the Affordable Care Act. A pharmaceutical company can then press suit against the government agency for lost profits. And as you heard, it goes to a private tribunal made up of business attorneys. If the case goes against the government, then the government has two unhappy options. It can either raise taxes to reimburse private companies for their lost profits, or it can deny essential medications to the people who depend upon them to live. Now, as you just heard, this tribunal is responsible to business interests. The interests of patients, taxpayers, working families cannot be considered. The evidence from NAFTA says their interests will not be considered. What does this mean for us? If you're an investor in a large business, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is really good for you. But the people who invest in large businesses aren't worried about how they're going to feed their families, or where their next meal is coming from, or where their rent's going to come from, or wondering if they have a sick child, whether they have enough money to go to the emergency room to find out that it's just a fever and a little Tylenol will fix it, or whether it's meningitis. This is the kind of choice that our free market should not impose on families. Should you take your child to the emergency room, or should you buy the asthma medications that keep your other child out of the emergency room, or should you buy food? Not a pleasant free market choice. Working families need all the help they can get. The Trans-Pacific Partnership will remove prescription medications from many people who need them, and they'll pay the ultimate price, and there'll be more working families without somebody in it to work. What America needs is a trade agreement that protects and preserves American lives and families, not one that destroys them. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Lowen Berman. He's an environmental speaker, and please welcome him.
Hi. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor, and I appreciate it. My name is Lowen Berman, and I'm one of those climate activists that you might have been warned about. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been a member of 4 trade unions, vice president of one of the largest locals in Oregon. I've been a punch press operator, a truck dock loader, and a warehouse laborer. Been a production assembler and a telephone wire inspector. Although I'm now retired, I've been a journeyman model maker and machinist. I've also been a union negotiator and arbitrator. I've been paid and unpaid union organizer. I have a great deal of respect for the skilled trades. I happen to have a master's degree in labor studies, and I can tell you right now that I found that becoming a journeyman model maker was a darn sight more demanding than earning my master's degree. My wife and I raised 2 wonderful daughters. I understand the needs of supporting a family. I tell you these things not to honor myself, but to let you know that I honor all of you. On the other hand, I'm offended by wealthy politicians and corporate and business leaders when they shed crocodile tears about jobs and income equality and the plight of the working class. Many of these same folks are telling us that there's a conflict between caring for our planet and caring for our jobs and families. The truth is that only by caring for our environment can we truly protect our jobs and our families. We need to listen to one another and not to folks whose only real concern is their own profits. Before I talk about the TPP and the environment, let me please have a brief word about climate change. It's real, it's big, and it's the primary cause of it is the burning of fossil fuels. A glance at the news almost any day of the week will confirm that the U.S. and the world are already facing unprecedented storms, floods, droughts, and other weather-related crises. This is only the beginning. 2015 will be the warmest year on record, and aid agencies are already warning that the climate extremes expected in 2016 are likely to increase the threat of hunger and disease for tens of millions of people throughout the world. You know, if scientists were to announce tomorrow that a giant asteroid was on a collision course with Earth, that it would strike in the next few decades and would devastate our planet, no expense would be too great, no effort too extreme to attempt to avert that catastrophe. The reality is that every scientific study has confirmed climate change is just such a threat. So now back to the TPP. Folks here today will be talking about the offshoring of jobs, the undermining of attempts to support raising labor standards here and abroad, the bans on attempts to support domestic agriculture and industry. Many of these threats are related to what you've been heard about earlier, the so-called ISDS provisions. ISDS, again, stands for Investor to State Dispute Settlement. It's legal jargon that means that a private company or corporation can sue a government if they believe that a government action, law, or regulation is interfering with their profit, or even their expected profit. They don't have to take the suit to a democratically chosen court or other national, state, or local body. No, they take their case to a panel of 3 private arbitrators, one of whom is chosen by the corporation. Most of these arbitrators are attorneys specializing in international trade with a built-in bias towards putting private economic interests ahead of public welfare. There is no appeal to their decision. Their decision supersedes any national legal bodies, including the U.S. Supreme Court. If they win their case, the government in question can face enormous fines. Under similar NAFTA provisions, the government of Ecuador, was recently ordered to pay $2 billion to Occidental Petroleum. Veolia, a giant international corporation, is currently suing the Egyptian government for interfering with its profitability by raising the minimum wage. Canada has been sued for making prescription drugs too cheaply. Health and safety laws can be challenged if a corporation feels that they unreasonably restrict their ability to make a profit. Food safety standards could be challenged for the same reasons. In effect, the TPP and other similar agreements explicitly and effectively put the maximization of corporate profit as the highest priority of the international economic system, overruling the economic, health, and environmental interests of the overwhelming majority of the world's people, including us. And what does the TPP say about the challenge of climate change? Nothing. In spite of the fact that virtually the entire scientific community, as well as the president and even the Pope, have called climate change the greatest threat facing humanity, the TPP doesn't once mention the words climate change. Why should it? Because if the TPP is adopted, global corporations can use the ISDS provisions to challenge environmental and climate safeguards and other attempts to mitigate the climate crisis. As you just heard, recently when Quebec tried to impose a moratorium on environmentally destructive fracking, they were challenged by foreign corporations arguing that such a moratorium would interfere with their profits. The bottom line is that the TPP will greatly increase the power of global corporations while decreasing the ability of local, state, and even national governments to care for their citizens. What would that mean for working folks? Are the fossil fuel companies right? Are the corporations the job producers and the environmentalists the job killers? Absolutely not. Older folks like myself remember the newsreel of our World War II factories pouring out guns and tanks and planes by the thousands. Environmentalists argue that we need a World War II level of mobilization today to meet the challenge of climate change. But the factories need to be pouring out wind turbines and solar plants and electric vehicles and new generations of energy storage systems. We need to be building, installing, and maintaining a new energy and transportation infrastructure. We need to be retrofitting millions of energy inefficient buildings. Such a mobilization would provide many times more jobs than the dying fossil fuel industry can produce. Make no mistake, the fossil fuel industry is in permanent decline, but in their drive to milk the last possible profits from their destructive products, they continue to act as a powerful barrier to a necessary transition to a sustainable economy. Adoption of the TPP would only strengthen their hand. I know there are times when it can be difficult to balance the need for honest work and providing for our families with our concerns for the good of our communities and our planet. I think about what it must be like for the families who for generations have had their livelihood tied to the tobacco or coal industries and are now finding their honest labor questioned because of the health effects of the products they produce. Sometimes it seems like working folks are caught between a rock and a hard place. Fortunately, skilled construction trades have broad applications. Workers like yourselves can as easily be employed building geothermal and solar energy plants as they can by the fossil fuel industry. But that will only happen if those environmentally positive jobs are available. So I'm asking each of you to join with the environmental community in demanding that our government provide or incentivize massive investment in sustainable technologies that will in turn produce millions of long-term jobs for the skilled trades and everybody else. Let's not fight each other. Let's fight together for jobs and for the planet. Thank you.
Okay, next speaking is Scott Blau, and I ran into Scott Blau Wednesday. He held a vigil in front of Senator Wyden's office, and he is for the Oregon Alliance of Retired Americans, and he spoke on some issues, and I'd invite him to speak.
Thank you, Linda. And Linda, I want to thank Linda too for holding this forum today inside. When we gathered earlier for a rally, I didn't have the foresight to call it inside. We met outside in front of Wyden and Blumenauer's business over in the Lloyd Center. So we got soaked in that constant rain. It was like 40 degrees. So Linda may say that she's kind of a beginner at this, but I think she has some pretty good savvy knowing where to be holding their meeting. So thanks again, Linda. So there is some disadvantage of being the number 4 speaker about this subject of the TPP, but I will try to not repeat too many of the things that we've heard. But as a representative of seniors and retirees, we aren't particularly concerned about wages and jobs, although we are for the generations following us, because we're kind of beyond that time in our lives. But the thing that we're really impacted on is higher prescription drug prices. Seniors are the ones who use a higher percentage of their income spending on medications. So we're very much impacted. The TPP contains extreme patent protections as we've heard, for name brand pharmaceuticals that threaten to restrict access to cheaper life-saving medicines in all TPP countries, including the United States. Pharmaceutical interests have won a lengthy patent exclusivity period for certain types of drugs in the TPP agreement. This will make it more difficult for other companies to manufacture the cheaper generic versions, leading to higher costs for everyone, especially American retirees and seniors. Now, the United States has been more liberal in granting patents and other forms of regulatory protections to drug companies than other countries. The U.S. Trade Representative, at the urging of pharmaceutical companies, succeeded in pressuring other countries to provide the same protections and set them in stone as part of the TPP agreement. As a result, the TPP jeopardizes our country's ability to change its own rules on patents in the future, which will increase the price that consumers pay. In the United States, the exclusivity period for something called biologics now, these are drugs that are used to treat various types of cancer and other chronic conditions like rheumatoid arthritis and multiple sclerosis, is 12 years. However, many health advocates and President Obama have endorsed shortening this exclusivity period for biologics to 7 years. Now, the final TPP requires parties to provide 8 years of effective market protection. This provision would prevent access to clinical data and registration of cheaper versions of medicines for that 8-year period. While drug companies claim this protection is needed to promote innovation, it will extend drug monopolies at the expense of patient access and limit future reforms that the U.S. government can make. The TPP would also require countries to grant evergreen patents, which are patent extensions for small changes to the formula, the dosage, or administration of the drugs, regardless of whether these minor alterations improve the efficacy of the drug, further locking in higher prices. If there's a drug out there that they say take once every 8 hours, if it's changed to once every 6 hours, they can claim they need a patent extension because they've made a change. So you can be sure that they'll be taking advantage of that. The TPP could limit cost control measures in public programs. The federal government, as administrator of Medicare, works to lower the cost of prescription drugs for patients and the government through rebates, discounts, and drug formularies. However, the TPP agreement includes language that puts the interests of drug and medical device companies above those of beneficiaries and taxpayers by providing an opportunity for drug and device manufacturers to seek higher reimbursement amounts. Specifically, it requires countries that make available a review process for healthcare reimbursement decisions and to follow TPP procedural rules and principles. But the process is not required to be open to the public or consider alternate views. The vague language in this section provides no assurance that government agencies are protected from a legal challenge. Thus, under the transparency provisions, global corporations could contest reimbursement policies through their private courts, as we refer to the ISDS. Under this procedure, Medicare could be subject to a challenge by a foreign pharmaceutical company or a foreign subsidiary of a U.S. company. In contrast, citizens concerned about ensuring that Medicare gets the best value for its dollar are not guaranteed any formal role in such a challenge. That could end the drug discounts that Medicare recipients have to help them get through the Medicare Part D donut hole. Also, this agreement could tie the hands of future Congresses to enact legislation to negotiate drug prices under Medicare or enact Medicare drug rebate program, which would save Medicare $121 billion over 10 years. This is just doing what the government has done through the VA in negotiating prices. The TPP includes the investor-state dispute settlement system. It provides a mechanism for global corporations to sue countries. Under the ISDS, cases are adjudicated by an international tribunal. Using this mechanism, pharmaceutical companies can reap windfall profits at U.S. taxpayer expense. ISDS claims are growing in numbers. In 2012 alone, 58 cases were filed. Eli Lilly, a U.S. drug company, is currently using NAFTA's ISD provisions to challenge Canada's decision not to extend patents for Strattera and Zyprexa. Eli Lilly is seeking $500 million in compensation from Canada. The TPP would allow similar challenges against U.S. patent and reimbursement decisions by pharmaceutical companies by extending the ISDS to Australia, Japan, and other countries. Now, Americans already pay the highest prescription drug prices in the industrialized world. And last year, the average cost of drugs here in the United States was 13%. And that's over 8 times the rate of inflation for a single year. How many people know what the cost of living adjustment was for Social Security recipients for this year? Zero. Nada. Nothing. So there's this 13% average increase in 1 year for drugs. We've got the same amount of money that we have for the last year. So we can see where this is going and what kind of impact this has. The members of the Alliance for Retired Americans will be paying close attention to what our leaders do, and should anyone else who needs Medicare or prescription drugs. We know that free trade deals, especially when they've been negotiated in secret, end up being a bad deal for older Americans and working people. Now, here in Oregon, we know that Senator Merkley and Representative DeFazio are on our side. However, Senator Wyden, Representative Blumenauer, Schrader, and Walden are not supporting, they are supporting the TPP. Now, to my understanding, Representative Suzanne Bonamici is the only one who still might be influenced. So I would suggest that we spend our time contacting her, encouraging her to do the right thing to oppose the TPP when it comes up to a vote. The well-being of America's senior citizens may depend on defeating the TPP. Thank you.
I was just told that we have one politician in Springfield. Val Hoyle is attending. Oregon State House Representative. Thank you. Next speaking is Greg Pallison. He's a Vice President, Association of Western Pulp and Paper Workers, and talked about the Newburgh plant.
Thank you. You've been sitting for a bit. Why don't you all stand up for just a minute? Since I have to stand, you might as well stand with me. Huh? No, I'm just stretch your legs for a minute if you want, but don't leave. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the Newburgh Mill, but I also want to talk about the industry as a whole. So go ahead and sit down and put your feet up. No, I'm kidding. So this is my 14th year being Vice President Association of Western Pulp and Paper Workers, and then I'm the political director. At one time, the association, we had 24,000 members. We're down now to about 4,500. We had members in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and California. We now have members in Virginia. I want to talk about the impact on the trade agreements on manufacturing, and manufacturing obviously impacts us all on jobs and the future of what's there. Every mill in the last 15 years that we represent, every location that has either had layoffs or has been permanently closed has been approved for TAA benefits, trade adjustment assistance, or the old NAFTA benefits. Hard to believe, every location in the last 15 years, except for one in California. Oregon City, you remember the Oregon City mill? That had, at one time, we had 500 people work there. When it closed, they had 300 people that lost their jobs. It was the largest tax source for Oregon City. Gone. They had orders for one full year. It wasn't that they didn't have customers. It's that they could not compete against what the Chinese were bidding for recovered waste paper. Oregon City mill ran off of 100% recovered paper. West Rock mill, now it's called West Rock in Newburgh. That mill, at one time, there were about 500 people working there. It's just closed. It's just now closing. It's being mothballed. It may start up. I believe firmly, looking at the industry data, that if the TPP passes, that mill won't start back up. If it doesn't, it might, and it's because of what's going to happen in the expansion in the industry. Blue Heron and both West Rock, which was the old Smurfit mill in Newburgh, both ran 100% recovered waste paper. That's what they used to make their product. And again, they have orders. It was that they couldn't hardly compete for bidding for recovered waste paper. The Newburgh mill made newsprint, and you'll hear people and some of the politicians say, oh, they're in a dying industry. Bullshit, pardon my French. They converted to where they can make container board. Container board is growing, has been on a trend of growing along with tissue products. So even though the mill retooled and reconfigured, that mill's closed. The Albany mill, that was used to be Weyerhaeuser, it was Willamette Industries, the Weyerhaeuser, then IP. That mill closed. And at the same time IP closed the Albany mill, it closed the Franklin, Virginia mill. The day after, they closed them both on the same day. The day after those mills closed, IP raised the price they were selling containerboard for 15% on the East Coast and 18% on the West Coast. The industry trend has been by our competitors shut down what they believe are strategic locations that will drive the price up. It's all about money, of course, for them, with no allegiance or alliance to the counties or the cities, the counties, or really the United States. The North Bend, Oregon mill, that was a Weyerhaeuser mill, closed. And this is not happening just in Oregon. I'm out of the Weyerhaeuser mill in Longview, Washington. I worked at the facility as an electrician, instrument tech, specializing in computer control systems. That mill closed, and the fine paper division, they made copy paper, closed in 2004. That mill, along with all these other mills I'm mentioning, was dismantled, put in 255 containers, shipped overseas, and brought back online, making the same products we made here. Every mill that has been closed, the equipment's dismantled, shipped overseas, and brought back online. So the story you hear from a lot of politicians in the industry is a line of BS. Kimberly-Clark, Everett Mill, 800 people worked there, our union members. Profitable mill. It closed, the equipment was dismantled, most of the paper machines were shipped to Brazil. Georgia Pacific, Camas Mill. They used to have 1,200 people. They're now down to 400. And they've received TA certification. You don't get TA certification for nothing. The Department of Labor does an investigation. You get it if you've lost your job due to unfair trade and imports coming in that are unfair. Capstone used to be Longview, Washington. Up at Longview, used to be Longview Fiber, it's now Capstone. Used to have 1,400 people, down to 800. And all these jobs I'm mentioning, I could go on, the list is much greater than that. And there's been a number of estimates. For every job that we have that we've lost on the manufacturing side, pulp and paper especially, there's another 5 direct jobs lost. So do the math. And again, as I said, every location, the equipment sold, shipped overseas, or shipped to South America, brought back online. Portland, Oregon is known as a great recycle city, right? People, I mean, it's known worldwide. Currently, 70% of the recovered recycled waste paper that we gather in the United States goes overseas. It's exported. I think most Oregonians or most people, at least in the Portland area, who believe in recycling would be pissed, again, pardon my French, to know that that's what's going on with their good efforts to recycle. It's absolutely ridiculous because when that basically raw material or those things that you need to make the products, it's recycled, shipped overseas, made in the same products we made here and brought back. And all you have to do is go online and look at the pollution levels in China. We're damaging our environment greatly by the offshoring of our jobs because it's not just the jobs that goes. Log exports have been at record highs in Oregon and out of the United States. At the same time of those log export record highs, price has been at record high. And in the areas where the logging is taking place, unemployment is at record highs. We are becoming a nation that exports our natural resources so that it can be made into products instead of doing it here. And like I said, you'll hear people say pulp and paper is a dead and dying industry. No, it's not. Every month, China is bringing on new machines. They now have the world's fastest, the world's biggest, and the most advanced in technology. One of the richest people in China works or owns and is in the pulp and paper industry. And as certain countries become more civilized and they start using toilet paper and a lot of tissue products and stuff, you know, the estimates are it goes up. And again, container board. China pays $1.90 an hour to work in the paper industry at the top end. No pensions, you know, no medical insurance, very little safety, and the environment impact is terrible. China is concerned about India, and China does not have the raw materials for producing paper. Right now, illegal logging is estimated at $10 billion a year in South America alone. And that's the illegal logging they know about, right? India has the raw materials. They have the fiber to make paper. India pays 10 cents an hour. And China's worried about the expansion in India, that China will not be able to compete. Now let's talk about the jobs that we don't lose. Every contract negotiation that we've negotiated over the number of years, since NAFTA especially, in reality has been concessionary. You might get a 2% pay raise, but your medical costs has gone way up, or other things. And again, you'll hear some of these industry experts, so-called experts in my opinion, and others say, well, you know, it's not the wages that's driving the expansion overseas. It's not that. It's a number of other issues. Again, BS. If it's not the wages, why do we fight so hard to try to get a 1% pay raise? Why doesn't the company say, oh, here it is? Hell, take 2 or 3%, because it doesn't matter. It matters greatly, and it's shameful that people take that kind of attitude and that opinion. Now, quick, I want to talk about, you'll hear politicians, a number of them, and we really need to put pressure on Bonamici. I believe she has decided she's going to support TPP. She just doesn't want to take the political heat for it yet, because she played the same game on the TPA. She indicated, oh, she didn't know, had to see it. Yeah, well. So you hear people talk about our national deficit all the time, right? How many of you hear politicians talk about our trade deficit? A couple of you hear them talk about it? Our trade deficit approaches $800 billion a year at times. Unbelievable. And if that comes down just a little bit, you'll see it in the newspaper, but rarely. So why don't they talk about the trade deficit? Because, you know, our national deficit has gone up for at least one unpaid war, 2 unpaid, but I won't go through all of that with you. You know the issue there. Tax breaks on the rich and the loss of manufacturing in this country and our tax base. That's one of the reasons why we have the national deficit. So if the politicians care about the national deficit, they would not be supporting the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other agreements that right after the chorus, the Korea Free Trade Agreement passed. Since then, in the last 3 years, our deficit with Korea has escalated. It's all about the race to cheap labor and the exploitation of workers. And again, you heard me talk about the negative impact on the environment. If Bonamici, Schrader, and the rest of them tell you they care about the environment, for them to vote yes and support good safety standards and environmental standards here, and then turn around and sign an agreement that doesn't require at least something similar, BS. You don't care about the environment. You don't care about workers, or you wouldn't do that. And in fact, because of these trade agreements, our environment is getting much worse. Now, some of them, and Wyden's one of them, met with him a number of times. He'll tell you, well, the TPP's different. It has enforcement in it. Again, BS. Enforcement is after we've lost our jobs, after you've lost your house, after the kids have dropped out of college. And if there's enforcement and there's money that's gotten because somebody broke the rules under the trade agreements, guess who gets that money? Lawyers and the companies. The employees or workers don't get it. Now, one of the big pieces on the trade agreement, the Investment State Dispute Settlement, ISDS, I've asked Wyden, and I challenge you all to ask your representatives, why is there not a worker state dispute settlement? If we can show we clearly lost our job because of unfair trade agreements, and we can clearly show that, the rules are specific on how you do it, the Department of Labor does an investigation, why should we not then, those who lost our jobs, get paid as if we would have worked until we retire? Because that's what the corporations get. They have more rights than us. This is pure BS. What, you know, it's unbelievable. Of course, if I think 600 union workers or worker rights advocates were writing the TPP, maybe that had been in there, as it should be, but we know who wrote those issues. How many of you saw Boeing is making expansion in China? Washington State legislative session last year basically handed Boeing $4.9 billion in tax breaks. No strings attached whatsoever. Boeing said, oh, you know, if we get this, we'll probably build our new jets and stuff in Washington. Didn't have to. In fact, what happened was it helped Boeing move to South Carolina faster, sooner. Shameful, you know, Wyden especially, we would have thought, you know, most of us would have thought he'd come to his senses. Evidently, those can be bought and paid. So I'll end with that, but as I said, you know, the impact and on the forestry, pulp and paper is not a dying industry. We live in the biomass capital of the world, in a sense. And yes, logging is controversial. And I tell people, you know, how many of you, I'm curious, how many of you have used paper products or wood products in the last 30 days? All right, let me try to narrow it down. How many of you have used paper products in the last 7 days? All right, well, how about in the last 3 hours? You're not helping me much here. How many have not used paper products in the last 30 minutes? All right. So this image and these things that these corporations want to paint, it's about money with no allegiance or alliance to the communities they're in, and it's exploitation like we've never seen in a long, long time. So, thanks very much.
Okay, Dr. Metz is going to say some more, and then we'll go to Springfield.
Tom put up on the wall there a very valuable telephone number, which is how to get to your U.S. congressional delegation. What are you going to say when you get Senator Wyden on the other line? Well, you got to keep it short, all right? Our elected legislators have no higher attention span than I've got as a physician, and mine isn't very long. So you've got 2 minutes to make your point. You don't have to review everything I've just told you or what you've heard. You say, my real job is making sure my family has a warm, dry place to sleep, that my children grow up literate, that we have enough to eat, and that we get the medications we need to keep us alive. The Trans-Pacific Partnership will not do that. Please do not vote for it. I'm your constituent. This will hurt me. Keep it brief. You don't have to explain the Trans-Pacific Partnership to them. Make it personal. Make sure that you have a stake in how they vote. Thank you.
Okay, Springfield?
Yeah, Nancy, we actually have 3 politicians and 1 representative from clerk, so I was going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves and speak a little.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Phil Barnhart. I'm the state representative from Central Lane and Lynn counties. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about an event that occurred just recently and then ask a specific question, which I hope your panel can answer. The statement is that I attended a town hall meeting with Senator Merkley in Brownsville just a few days ago. And one of the things that he asked the crowd there, and this crowd were veterans, conservative Republicans, liberal Democrats, and everybody in between. He asked how many people in this room, that was a full room, support this Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement. And the answer was 0. Nobody put up their hands. Everybody in that area agrees that this is a bad deal for Oregon and for Oregonians. Now my question. Several of the points that have been made through the day have essentially said that once we get into this, we're going to be stuck with positions that should be changed in the future to fix things. The specific one I remember had to do with drug patents. What are the provisions in this treaty for withdrawal from the treaty in the event that it turns out to be as bad a deal as I'm sure we all are convinced that it is. What are the ways to get out of the thing later, and how costly will it be when the rest of Americans figure out that this agreement is a huge transfer of power from voters and from our own local governments, from our cities, and even from the United States government to these large zombie corporations?
A brief answer from the medical perspective is one of the first things we're taught in medicine is that it's easier to stay out of trouble than to get out of trouble. We don't know what's in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The easiest thing to do for us is not get there in the first place rather than get there and figure out how we're going to get out.
Let me just make an additional comment. I have not read all of the agreement, but I have read much of it. And as far as I can tell, this agreement, like all the other agreements that we have signed, have no exit provisions to it. Once you're in, you're in. So it's best not to get in the first place.
If you don't mind, I'll add to that too. There's two pieces to getting out. One is you have to have the political will. And you look at the numbers since NAFTA, every trade agreement, they've been failures. The numbers are explicit out of the Department of Labor and the U.S. Commerce. If you look at it, they'll talk about our exports increase, but they don't do the rest of the math. You know, if you have 10, but you minus 20, you got to add minus 20, which is minus 10 the last time I spent 3 of my best years in the 10th grade. But, you know, it literally takes an act of Congress to get out. It takes an act of Congress to get in, it takes an act to get out. As you said, it's way more difficult. Of the pressure, all the protests, world trade agreements and everything, we've never gotten out of a trade agreement, ever, and we probably won't.
Hi, I'm Nancy Nathanson. I'm a state representative in the Oregon legislature. I represent North Eugene and a lot of downtown Eugene. I want to speak to two things. One is the comment just a few moments ago about not being able to get out of an agreement. It's pretty hard to imagine how we should get into something when there's not an appropriate off-ramp and not appropriate penalties and not appropriate enforcement for non-compliance. It's tough enough as it is in working with the corporate world to figure out what the appropriate balance is of power between the parties in contracts, but I sure would want to see appropriate enforcement, penalties, and off-ramps. The other thing I want to point out is thank you for doing this today. I especially appreciated the conversation about prescription drugs. One of my main responsibilities in the legislature right now is I'm co-chair of the Human Services budget. And in common terms, that means the Budget Writing Committee for Health and Human Services. One of the primary things that disturbs me about cost escalation, and you all are already there, you understand it, is the cost of prescription drugs. So to the extent that you've provided additional information for me to understand now the potential impact on the cost of those drugs, I appreciate having that new information today. Thank you. Hi, I'm Belle Boyle, state representative from West Eugene, Junction City, and I appreciate being invited here and that we're having this. My background is in international trade, and when NAFTA came through, I was working for a company that made products here. Our main competitor was in Canada. It took me more paperwork to send 3 units to Canada than a container to Germany, and yet my Canadian competitor had a competitive advantage because they had access to everything I did. Not the same as in Canada. We ended up, someone purchased the company, moved our products offshore, we lost a lot of jobs, and although the people that worked in our manufacturing plant got money for retraining because, again, NAFTA impacted our ability to be competitive making products in the United States, they weren't able to get the same kind of jobs. So, my background is international trade. I know what free trade agreements do, and I don't think that lowering standards for workers and the environment anywhere helps workers. And we can't just look after workers here in the United States. We have to look after workers and the environment everywhere. We have a global economy, which is why fair trade agreements
work. Fair trade agreements mean that people can get paid well here and elsewhere. And finally, there is one piece of this trade agreement that there's many things that concern me, and I'm not supportive, but one piece that's very, very concerning is a lack of protections against human trafficking, which was something that was put forward, that was not put into the TPP. So for all the other reasons that it's problematic, and problematic for American workers in manufacturing, that piece, if we think about the human cost, is devastating. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Mussel. I'm the director of the Labor Education and Research Center at the University of Oregon. And I would just echo what our political leaders here in Lane County have said. I guess one thing that occurs to me in all of this is that, you know, it's a big sporting weekend, and you think about playing a game. Usually with games, you have rules, you have referees, you have umpires to make things fair. And it just seems to me that this type of agreement, along with the others that accompanied it, folks have talked about, either there's no referees, they're blindfolded, their hands are tied, and again, you think about international trade and agreements, there's a term that's often used, reciprocity. And where I come from, that means that there's mutual obligations. And as Brother Pallison, I think, so eloquently pointed out, where's the reciprocity when it comes to workers and labor standards? This really just seems like creating a game that's totally rigged the way that things have been going. And we have so much of a lack of a balance of power and any real standards for working people. This just accelerates and accentuates some extraordinarily bad trends. And the last thing I would say is I think all of us here care about democracy. And I think that this just undermines not only our economic well-being, but it really just undermines any notions of democracy where the will of the people, the vast majorities of people, not only in this country but in other parts of the world, is undermined. So I would just again urge all of us to keep on keeping on as far as keeping the pressure on and having these conversations and demanding of our political leaders that they provide us with real answers to really explain to us how this genuinely benefits workers and supports democracy rather than damages it. Thank you.
I just really want to thank Springfield. It's just awesome, you all showing up and speaking and saying what you said. Thank you so much. Okay, now we're going to have a period for questions for our panelists, and I guess we'll begin.
Can you hear me now? No, it's a union hall. What do you reply? Union! Union! Thank you. I want to say one thing. Thank you very much, gentlemen up here. I don't have any questions, and lady, I'm sorry. I don't have any questions because you said it all right. But I do want to say one thing to the workers. There are meetings like this going on in New Zealand, in Japan, and all those other countries. The only reason you aren't hearing about it is the same corporations that are pushing this own the media, and they're not telling you what's going on. It's been taking place in secret for 7 years. If we don't get to our congresspeople and get this voted down, they don't even get to debate it anymore. All they get a chance to do in that 90-day period is go yes or no. If they go yes, there will be no unions in Vietnam where they're paid 6 cents an hour. This is not between corporations and corporations. This is between corporations and you and I. I'm the facilitator for Occupy Portland Elder Caucus, and we've been following this since we were in tents downtown. Please don't let the corporations make you fight the workers in these other countries. At least we have a union hall. at least we have the ability to get together and talk about this. Let's see if we can't form some unions in those other countries and make their living better. Thank you.
We're going to kind of hold these to about 2 minutes or so everybody gets to speak, and we're not here all day.
Thank you. My name is Gail, and I too want to thank everybody here. My husband is a fitter, and we were asked, because of a friend, to attend a meeting just like this out of Olympia more than a year ago, and the crowd was enormous because they invited every union in town. And so it wasn't just fitters, plumbers, fitters. It was every union. I agree with everything that was said today. The one caution I have is I spend a lot of time on the phone, a lot of time at the offices of politicians, and it's really hard for voters to convince a politician who doesn't give a damn. Republican, Democrat, if they've been bought, they've been bought. And there is no reason for them to vote for something like this unless they've been bought. And so we need to really come together and to speak out and to say that a politician said he or she agrees with it, but you're not sure because they've never been against it. We know some that have been against it. Universally, historically, been against it. We need to vote wisely. We need to pressure hard because an election year is a good year for voters to make a difference. But don't call or go to your office. Start phone banking. Start going to the office in groups and start putting on very hard pressure to make them believers. They get the money from large corporations, and they're not going to back down unless we force them to back down. Thank you very much.
My name is Ted Dreyer. I'm a member of the Portland Association of Teachers. I have a question for our panel, just to make this point. We're about to create, our government's creating a program that will enable big corporations to sue us using their corporate lawyers. So can our government sue corporations under the conditions of the TPP? Does this go both ways?
So the simple answer to that is no. No, this is a one-way street. This is allows multinational corporations, doesn't allow domestic corporations to do this. It allows multinational corporations, foreign corporations, to sue our government or other governments. And it does not allow us, no matter how much we may be harmed, to go back and sue corporations. One-way street, and it's not our direction.
Hello, my name is Michael Brassell, and I'm with Carpenters Local 1503's Labor for Bernie Caucus. And I'm glad to see so many of you out here today, opposing the free trade agreement, Trans-Pacific Partnership. A question was asked earlier about canceling a trade agreement, and I just want to speak to that really quickly. Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2 of the United States Constitution grants the President of the United States power to negotiate or renegotiate trade agreements. Okay? Moving forward, do we want to support a president that for 20 years or more has been involved in negotiating trade agreements and supporting trade agreements, more than 45 separate occasions before various business groups? Or do we want to support a candidate that has opposed NAFTA, CAFTA, the South Korean Free Trade Agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, every single one of these trade agreements that got worker protections? Let's just talk really quickly about the worker protections we're talking about. We used to have Buy America laws in this country. Okay. These Buy America laws used to encourage state governments to purchase paper from American mills, okay? When I lost my job in 2008 because of rampant real estate speculation, I went to work for the unions, canvassing in communities from Albany to Hood River. I've talked to more than 20,000 people at their door, okay? I canvassed Oregon City 3 separate times. And I tell you what, Oregon City is one of these places where there are thousands, literally thousands of people at home because they never recovered from that mill closing down, okay? NAFTA did that to us. Okay, now the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement and this investor-owned dispute settlement, it allows not just the throwing out of our Buy America laws on the state level and on the national level, it allows these corporations to challenge us on the local level. Okay, and that's what's particularly harmful about this. Here in Portland, the Portland City Council has passed buy local provisions, okay, which give our local contractors points, effectively, for purchasing from local providers, okay? Now, as a carpenter, this is going to affect me, and how this is going to affect me is we're starting to build wood buildings that are like 20 stories or more, okay? We're using these glue lamp technologies to basically build higher wood buildings. We're really excited about this. We like the idea of pouring money back into the local economy and supporting trade unionists and supporting union strength here locally, okay? I'm just gonna bring it right back around really quick. On the 23rd here, Saturday the 23rd, we're gonna have a March for Bernie Sanders, okay? We support this guy. We want you to come out and support us. We've got a Labor for Bernie caucus. There's brothers and sisters in the Teamsters, carpenters, some electricians. We'd like you to come down. There'll be flyers in the
Thank you.
My name is Jack Herbert. I'm an AFSCME retiree, and frankly, I think we should give the brother as much time as he needs, because that's the direction to head. I think we learned something about, the incentive system for corporations is inherently immoral. The bottom line is we got to make as much money as possible, which means we got to screw everything else to do that. What's the incentive system for politicians? They are individual business people in business to get elected, right? So the incentive system is to do whatever it takes to get elected. And we know that what it takes to get elected is more campaign money. And we saw what happened in 2004 with Howard Dean's candidacy. It sounded like he might be working for us. He was winning primaries. And what happened? There was this big deal about he screamed. So he was at a political rally. They docked him to mics. What do you do at a political rally? Everybody shouts and screams. So he said, well, he was screaming. And you wouldn't want to vote for somebody who was screaming, would you? So the news media killed his candidacy. Now, clearly the only leverage we've got on these guys is to challenge them in the election and to vote them out of office. So what I want to know is what are our plans to run candidates against these guys and work for those in the Democratic primaries? Because for many of these people, it's the Democratic primary that's going to determine whether they get elected or not. So, like Greg, you're with the unions, and they're the ones who are organized and have the money. Who are they planning to run against? Wyden, Bonamici, Blumenauer, and Schrader. So, amen. And any of the rest of them.
Yeah, good question, and I don't want to get into a lot of the politics of that in a sense, because we do want to cover the TPP, but it's difficult to get people to be able to step up because of the money behind the politics. We've got to overturn Citizens United as one of the biggest starts, and it's difficult to get. Otherwise, they know that they firmly believe they're going to get reelected no matter what. That's why they have the arrogance they do.
That means we're going to lose. So we can do that.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay. Shannon from Southwest Washington Labor Council.
Hello, brothers and sisters. My name is Shannon Walker. I'm president of the Southwest Washington Labor Council in Vancouver, on the other side of the bridge that I had so much trouble getting over today. That's why I was late. It was ridiculous. But we don't need transportation packages. It's okay. Anyway, TPP. We had an event of TPP over in our neck of the woods, and we invited our glorious senators, Murray and Cantwell, who basically were the deciding voters to pass the TPA. Thank you, senators. And one of the questions that I gave to them, and that I would encourage that you ask your representatives here as well, is what with TPP is good for me? What in TPP is good for the citizens that you represent? I've asked that question, I've asked for an answer, and I have yet to get anything back from any of my officials in Washington on, if this is so good for us, give me a list. I have yet to hear from them. I encourage you to ask that question and call, email. You cannot stop. We know you've got great union leaders who are out there working at this every single day, but if we don't get you guys active in the rank and file, we don't have the numbers to do it ourselves. So spread the word, get your friends. My mother and father are also calling TPP. I'm having my kids call on TPP. They're 11 and 9.
All right.
Everybody needs to call, including the youngins, because these are the jobs that they aren't even going to see or dream of seeing if we don't stop it now. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cliff Goldman. I'm a volunteer for I do a lot of work for Oregon Fair Trade Campaign and Healthcare for All Oregon. I just have a question, a point of information. Okay, the investor state dispute settlements, it goes to the arbitrators, and that's fixed. There's a bias, and there's no appeal, and there's this big fine, a huge amount of money that the corporations can sue us, the United States of America. My question is, maybe it's just obvious and I don't get it. How do they enforce that? Let's say that the government says, that's just too much, it's totally outrageous, we're not going to do it. How is that enforceable? There's a lot of talk about enforceability coming one way. What if the people say, well, screw you, we're not going to pay it? What prevents us, or where is the enforcement on their side? David Dilk probably can answer that, right?
No, I'm going to step up to the mic, but I don't really have an answer to that. I will say that maybe 15 years ago, Argentina was faced with the question about paying debt to, I believe it was to the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund. And they actually said, no, we're not going to do that. And I think actually a lot of the answer to the question as we move forward with these suits is for nations just to say, no, we're not going to do that.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy Reagan. Just say no. Okay.
We're going to have some comments from our speakers here, please. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, everything folks are saying about call your representative and call everybody, get involved, that's all correct, and I really hope people do that. But, I marched with Dr. Martin Luther King at the time of the Civil Rights Movement, and it wasn't about calling your representative, it was about turning out the people by the thousands and the tens of thousands. And unfortunately, our voices don't count as much as those dollars that the corporations provide. But when we mobilize, when we organize, just like the labor movement organized, the labor movement didn't organize because folks voted in the right politicians. They organized because people put their lives on the line. People went out and fought and worked. That's what it's going to take. So while I absolutely support calling this number, calling your representatives, meeting with them, letting them know how it's affecting you personally. I also suggest that you got to organize. It's been the basis of the labor movement. It's the basis of every movement that's really changed things. Mass organizations of lots of people, and that's all I got to say.
Here's something a little bit radical about the role of money in politics. The intersection between our elected representatives and money are votes. Imagine if each one of us in this room were to write a letter, make it hard copy, to our representatives saying, I'm your constituent. The Trans-Pacific Partnership will hurt my family, don't vote for it. And our elected representatives get 50 letters like that in a week, after week, after week. And each one of us recruits other people to write letters, signing it sincerely, your voting constituent. At some point, our elected representatives will have to say to the people who are giving them money, thank you, I'm happy to take your money, but I don't think you can give me enough to convince the people of my district that they're really happy with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If I want to stay in office, I need to honor the will of a critical mass of my voting constituents. Do not underestimate the power of this weapon of mass destruction. You sign it, send it to your elected representatives, do it frequently, do it often, and get everyone who thinks the same way you do to do the same, and eventually we'll triumph. Thank you.
So I had two comments. One is that there was a very recent, like in the past 2 weeks, a new report from the World Bank which looked at the economic benefit which the 12 countries that are party to the Trans-Pacific Partnership would gain as a result of the partnership. And of course, when the president talks about this agreement, as with all past agreements, they always point that this is going to grow the economy, this is going to grow your jobs. The World Bank's estimate for the United States, the TPP will grow the American economy by 0.4%. 0.4%. That's real close to zero. Okay. It won't be you, Jack. So my other comment is a little bit aside from this, except that many of you have brought this question about money and politics up. And for some of you who know me, know this is one of my big issues. Here in Oregon, we have the beginning of a new effort for a ballot measure to amend the Oregon Constitution to allow limits on campaign contributions. Oregon's one of 4 states with no limitations whatsoever, and we really, really, really need to change that. So I have the initiative with me, and if you are a registered voter in the state of Oregon, I would love to have your signature before we leave here today.
Hey, for those of you in Bonamici's district, all politics is local, and it's a combination and things are cumulative, but calls and showing up and doing that does make a difference. She is feeling the heat some, particularly right now because of the Newburgh closing. Portland garbage rates just went up because the Newburgh mill is closed. The reason is the mill would take waste, recovered waste biomass, and use it either to make the product or to, kind of, well, that's what they did. And so the Chinese now have, the way the market works, they bid for the top good grade stuff, and the U.S. gets the secondary stuff. And if that mill can't run it, so now it's going into the landfills. So call Bonamici. I want to stress with you, she's going to give you a song and a dance. She's going to tell you, she's very concerned and she wants to do anything and everything she can to help the workers in that community. And she's going to tell you that that's why she's checking on the TA certification, Trade Assistance Adjustment Certification, which I filed on behalf of our workers. She has no say whatsoever or authority if that gets certified. And it could take months for that to get certified. We have one that was filed last June for Capstone in Longview, Washington. She has no authority on how long it takes for a certification to happen, but she's using that as political cover. And because the rules changed on the TA certification, you know, it used to be included Asian countries, and then it was cut back to just Mexico and Canada. Thank you, Republicans, for doing that. And then they expanded it, supposedly. I mean, that's how they got some votes on the TPA fast track, is by saying, oh, we'll go back and make it like it was. So she hasn't helped one bit on this, and it's political cover that she's using that as an excuse. Tell her if there's only one thing she can do to help that community and those workers, like all manufacturing, is vote no on the TPP. And don't let her out of it.
Okay, I guess, do we have any more questions for the panel? Okay.
Yeah, I've got a quick thought. My name's Tim Norgren. I've worked with the Laborers Union and IATSE 28. And my thought, there's been some talk, Lowen mentioned getting people organized, getting into the street. I think back to the founding of the labor movement when people were doing that. I mean, that's how we got the rights we have today, is to get out there. But it wasn't just, you know, petitioning people who might change something for us. It was a lot of getting out there, being shot at, being, you know, really getting down physically in the way of the machine that was keeping our rights out of our own lives. You know, we don't just passively let something happen and expect it to change. We've actually got to really fight for that sometimes. So I'd just like to put in a word for direct action, and I'd like to know if there's anything in the TPP that has even thought of that, but I'm sure they've got to expect resistance, that people around the world are not going to take it lightly, that people will rise up, that will oppose in various ways what's happening. Is there anything in that? I mean, I blockaded an oil terminal when Obama was here to promote the TPP.
Okay, thank you very
to tie
much.
it there.
Thank you.
So
Thank
is
you.
there-
We'll find someone to answer that question.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have an answer to that? No.
No good answers.
No good answers. Okay, next, please.
Let me just say that, you know, this is an agreement for between the 1%, and they really regard us pretty much as being irrelevant. It really doesn't matter what we think in their general scheme of things. So doing direct action, I think, is really something that we really need to be thinking about, how we do that. You know, and I spent a lot of time suggesting to people to write letters to the editor and to sign the petitions and to go before our representatives and beg them to do the right thing. And I think that we all need to do that. But at some point, we do need to say, that doesn't seem to be working, and we need to do something more.
Go ahead. I think this will be about the end of it, so we're not here all day. Thank you.
My name is Johnny, IBEW Local 48. I worked in a steel mill in McMinnville, 5 years, shut down. I worked at Smurfit, AWPPW, shut down. We were the best in the United States, mini mill steel and paper, and when they ship it overseas, they can't even do a third of what we can do here. It's bullshit, okay? We have to have direct action. Is there direct action that's going to happen? Is the IBEW teaming up with 290? I mean, what is going on? We need help. If we don't do it now, we're down. Because guess what? Our market share is down. It's going non-union. We don't have a choice. We better get off our asses and we better do something together or we're screwed.
Hi, my name is Shannon. I'm with the Oregon Fair Trade Campaign, and I'm going to be very brief because I jumped ahead in line. But I just wanted to say that here at the campaign, we embrace a wide methodology of strategies, everything from lobby visits with Congress people all the way up to direct action. Some of our recent direct actions included taking over the Nike store to ask them to stop offshoring our jobs last month, visibility action at the Newburgh Mill with AWPPW. So please, make sure you've signed in for the event. That'll make sure that Oregon Fair Trade Campaign can get the information about everything from lobby visits, phone banks, to direct action to you, because we embrace all of these strategies together. All of us and all of those strategies, we will win this fight. Thank you so much.
Name, please.
Darrell Smith, Local 290. I have a couple of comments, and I'd like some comments back from the staff. It seems to me that by giving up national sovereignty under allowing corporations to sue this country is unconstitutional. So I think it can be thrown out on that ground alone. The other one is, when you talk to the businessmen, the small companies, tell them, look, if this thing goes through and more people are out of work, they can't afford to buy these cheaper products that are coming in that are paying your wages and keeping you in business.
Who's gonna buy the Chevys, brother?
See, nobody can afford them.
Nope.
If you cut the wages, you can't afford the food, you can't afford the products. Henry Ford said he wanted to pay his people enough on the production line they could buy the product they made. And since that, corporations have gone down the tube. Thank you very much.
My name is Fred Smith. I'm a retired member of this local 290. I would like to say that this TPP is going to go down. I don't think it will. I think it's going to be passed. NAFTA was passed. It was by Wyden. Senator Wyden was the tie-breaking vote. We really need political representatives that stand for the working people, and I don't think we have them in either the Republican or the Democratic Party. I appreciate the fact that we've had a few politicians come down at some of the other meetings here and talk to us. We really need those people. But what we really need is a different political system. We need a new political party that represents the vast amount of people, the working people in the United States, and the Democrats are not it. If these people that supposedly represent us in Washington, we would be able to buy drugs from outside of the country. We'd be able to buy them from Europe. We'd be able to buy them even from Canada, where American drugs are sent for sale in Canada, and we can't get them at the Canadian prices. There's drugs for hepatitis that you can buy in India, where there's a serious problem with hepatitis in India. You can buy them for basically nothing. Over here, the same regimen for treatment would cost you in the multiple thousands of dollars. We are not being protected by our representatives. We need people like you and I in the audience here to actually be part of that party, to represent ourselves, because like I say, the people in Washington represent the interest of the corporations, the banks, the hedge funds. They don't represent us. The beginning of the year, they passed a new law on people with multi-employer benefit pension plans, which gets rid of the 40 years of protection that we had before that. I don't know what else to say other than we need different political representatives. The people in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are not doing it. These people didn't show up. They don't even give us the option to talk to them and the respect for them to come and present their own positions. Thank you.
I I will say that
There are lots of small groups out there and large groups that are active in doing different venues of activity. And that's how we got started. And so I encourage all of you to join and use like Fair Trade Oregon and Democracy, Alliance for Democracy. I'm nervous, sorry. So I guess, unless our speakers have something to say, I guess we'll conclude that, or if there's somebody in an outlying area that has something to say. I want to thank everybody. So if you have a comment. Thank you so much, all of you. We do have one little treat. Just wait just a second. We need lights off. Lights off up front. This is what David does over the freeway at night, and it is awesome.
All right.
Yes.
We could use some volunteers to help him. He didn't have a big enough crew last night to hold his lights.
That's right. If you want to do something, volunteer to hold David's lights. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you, right? It's the thing is, it's recording, play and play and play and that's.
Organization unleash flow.
Well, we'll see you tomorrow. Or, yes, tomorrow. Good enough. We'll see you then.